What's up guys, my name is Ace, and the R1 Shadowhunter crossbow from Black Ops Cold War is now available in Warzone, and therefore I wanted to share all of the Warzone specific stats for this crossbow, at least all of the important ones, and I wanted to compare it with the existing Modern Warfare crossbow in Warzone. Now just a quick disclaimer before we get into this, obviously these crossbows aren't going to be perfectly comparable to each other, because the Modern Warfare crossbow gains access to a ton of attachments, whereas the Cold War crossbow only gets optical attachments. And therefore, with the Modern Warfare crossbow, for instance, you can use an explosive bolt, whereas you don't have an option for an explosive bolt with the Cold War crossbow. So I'm going to do my best to try to compare these where it makes sense. But of course, I'm not going to be looking at absolutely every attachment combination on the Modern Warfare crossbow, because that would just be far too complicated and way outside the scope of this video. So with that out of the way, let's start hopping into the comparison here. And the first stat I want to look at is damage. It turns out both of these crossbows deal exactly the same amount of damage at 200 to the body. And keep in mind this applies anywhere in the body, so upper torso or toe, it doesn't really matter. You're going to be dealing 200 damage with both of these. And what this means is if the enemy has 2 armor plates and full health, you will get a one-shot kill to the body on them. However, if they have 3 armor plates equipped, then you won't get a one-shot kill. Unless with the Modern Warfare crossbow, if you are using the explosive bolts, then yes, that will always be a one-shot kill as long as you stick them with that bolt. As for headshots though, we deal at least 250 damage. This means with either of these crossbows, no matter what, if you hit them in the head with a crossbow bolt, you will be getting a one-shot kill. So far, fairly equal, although the Modern Warfare crossbow obviously gains an edge if you're using the explosive bolt when it comes to damage. Next, let's have a look at our bolt velocity. And this is where things get a little bit complicated. The base velocity for the bolts of the Modern Warfare crossbow is just 100 meters per second, whereas with the Cold War crossbow, it's 145 meters per second. So you get a very clear advantage in this area. This means you don't have to account for that bolt drop as much, and also you don't have to lead a moving target as much with the Cold War version of the crossbow. However, when we start factoring attachments into the Modern Warfare crossbow, we can actually range from about 89 meters per second all the way up to 140 meters per second if you're really maxing it out with attachments. Keep in mind though that 140 meters per second doesn't include the explosive bolt, which most people are going to be using. If you are using it with the explosive bolt as well as both of the attachments that boost your bolt velocity, your actual value is going to be 117 meters per second. So still not keeping up with the Cold War crossbow, and therefore the Cold War crossbow always has an edge when it comes to velocity. After that though, we'll have a look at our rate of fire, and our base rate of fire with the Modern Warfare crossbow is 18 rounds per minute, whereas the Cold War crossbow is 24 rounds per minute, so you gain an edge there. However, we can use the sleight of hand weapon perk on the Modern Warfare crossbow that brings the rate of fire in line with the Cold War crossbow at 24 rounds per minute, and most people are going to be using sleight of hand on it, so they are essentially equal in this area. As for our handling stats, our aim down sight time is noticeably slower with the Modern Warfare crossbow compared to the Cold War crossbow, so that's a little bit of an advantage to the Cold War crossbow. And our sprint out times are equal at 284 milliseconds. After that, I did look at hipfire, and it turns out our hipfire spread is exactly the same no matter which one of these crossbows that you're using, so there's no difference there. However, now I wanted to take a look at the accuracy of these bolts, because they don't actually fire perfectly straight. And I'm not just talking about the bolt drop either. I'm saying that there's actually some inconsistency with accuracy, like it will go a little bit to the left or to the right, or sometimes even upwards slightly. There is some unpredictability with both of these crossbows. And keep in mind with this test, I tried to equalize the stats as close as possible when it comes to building the attachments for the Modern Warfare crossbow. So with this, I've got the cable as well as the arm that boost our bolt velocity, so that we now have 140 meter per second bolt velocity, which is roughly comparable to the Cold War's bolt velocity. And also, I am not using the explosive tipped bolt on the Modern Warfare crossbow, partially because it makes it nearly impossible to see what's going on because the bolt itself explodes and it doesn't put a nice clean hole in the wall for me to compare with. But keep in mind, if you are using the explosive bolts, not only are you going to get a slower velocity and therefore more bolt drop, you're also going to get less accuracy with each shot fired. But looking at them side by side here, you can see where each one of the 5 bolts hit, keeping in mind this was at 25 meters, and the red dot is my point of aim. And one thing I noticed is it seems like there's a bit more vertical variance when it comes to the Cold War crossbow. However, there's a lot more horizontal variance with the Modern Warfare crossbow. And horizontal variance is what we want to avoid the most. Vertical variance isn't as important because humans are more of a vertical structure, and therefore you've got more leeway when it comes to vertical rather than horizontal. So overall, one of the big advantages to using the Cold War crossbow compared to the Modern Warfare crossbow is simply accuracy. It is more accurate with each bolt that you fire, and therefore you're more likely to be hitting your target, especially if we were to also add the explosive bolts to the Modern Warfare crossbow, because it would get even less accurate than it is here. So with that pretty much covers it for the main things I wanted to compare between these two crossbows. And I would say if you're not planning on running the explosive tip on the Modern Warfare crossbow, and we were comparing these without using the explosive tips, the Cold War crossbow is actually a little bit better than the Modern Warfare crossbow. However, most people that use the Modern Warfare crossbow will be using that explosive tip because it's a guaranteed one-hit kill even if the enemy has full armor plates equipped, no matter where you hit them in the body, as long as you stick them with the bolt. Whereas with the Cold War crossbow against those same enemies, you would have to hit a headshot, which is extremely difficult, especially at range in Warzone. So at the end of the day, when we start factoring in attachments for the Modern Warfare crossbow, especially that explosive tip, it's quite simply just better than the Cold War crossbow. Being a bit more accurate and having a better bolt velocity with that Cold War crossbow doesn't make up for the fact that you have to hit them in the head to get a kill. Whereas with the Modern Warfare crossbow, you can be a bit sloppy. As long as that bolt hits your target, they're going to be dying. And this is where I just want to share my overall thoughts on the Cold War crossbow, not necessarily compared to the Modern Warfare crossbow, but just in general in Warzone. Is it really good or even viable to use this in Warzone? Honestly, I don't think so. I don't think this is a good or even viable choice as a weapon, especially considering the fact that it is a primary weapon in Warzone. If this were a secondary, I could see an argument for using it, but even then, I wouldn't even necessarily consider it to be the best secondary in the game. But yeah, the fact that you would have to use overkill to take this as a secondary weapon, it just doesn't make any sense. If we have to hit that headshot against a fully armored enemy, wouldn't you just be so much better off with a Kar98 that is basically perfectly accurate with very little bullet drop and an extremely fast bullet velocity? It's so much easier to hit a headshot with a Kar98 than it would be with this crossbow. Like, they're not even remotely in the same league. And therefore, the Cold War crossbow, sure, if you want to mess around and have some fun with a unique weapon that is really, really far off meta, you may end up having some fun with it, but overall, it is not a competitive choice by any means, especially when you compare it to the explosive bolt version of the Modern Warfare crossbow. Now, of course, that is just my opinion backed up by all this data. I'd like to know in the comment section below. After seeing all these stats, what do you guys think about the Cold War crossbow, and what do you think is better, the Cold War crossbow or the Modern Warfare one? Just let me know those thoughts in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.